Welcome to another episode of What Pharma Needs Next, a podcast for the pharmaceutical industry. Today we have a really interesting topic, architecting the AI-ready enterprise. And I'm privileged to be joined by an esteemed guest, Kieron Scrutton from GSK. Kieron, pleasure to have you.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Now, Kieron, GSK has put a huge amount of focus into medical affairs, which is in your scope of responsibilities as a technology leader at GSK. Why is that, and what successes have come from that in the recent past?
I think it's really part of GSK's transformation as we move from being predominantly respiratory and vaccines-led business into one that's specialty in oncology. The growing importance of medical has just been obvious to all. From a tech point of view, it meant we needed to think about how much attention, focus, and resourcing we were applying to medical. And a couple of years ago, it became clear to us that there was the opportunity for us to invest a lot more energy in medical from a digital and tech point of view, and it's paid huge dividends.
Connected to that and what you're doing in medical, GSK has put out a very, very ambitious goal. The patient goal 2030 to positively impact 2.5 billion patients globally. How does such an ambitious goal in terms of helping patients out there around the globe reflect on what you're doing in terms of technology decisions and building your technology stack?
I think it affects it in several ways. So the most obvious one is scale. If we're going to be able to reach 2.5 billion patients every year, then we've got to make sure that all of our technology solutions scale. The other piece that's important is efficiency. So we're going to have to be very, very efficient if we're going to be able to make medicines that can extend that far out across the population. And again, automation and technology play a huge role in both scaling and enabling us to operate a very efficient enterprise.
One of the recent achievements you've had at GSK under your leadership as well was you moved to a new commercial platform, to Vault CRM, and you managed that complex endeavor, I think, across many different countries. Now, as a leader of that transformation, what were some of the unanticipated strategic lessons that you took away from moving to the next generation commercial platform?
We had a very clear vision for why we wanted to move and why we wanted to move first. And that was because we wanted to be on the new AI-ready platform, and we wanted to be there as soon as we could. Now, that actually meant that we treated this very largely as a technology upgrade. We made the minimum change to business processes. So that enabled us to go extremely quickly because that was the strategy we wanted. What I would urge anyone else thinking about this migration is to be thinking about what is it for their company that is the correct strategy. So if they are looking to do it to harmonize processes that are currently not harmonized, then they probably need to take a different approach from the one we took. We were very happy with the harmonized set of processes we had. And so we prioritized speed and lack of disruption. But actually talking to peers, I know that different companies have very different strategic visions. And I think it's important people think quite deeply, why are they doing it? And what does that mean is the right sort of project plan, the right partners, the right planning approach for them?
You prioritize speed, no disruption, essentially. Why was that so important for GSK? Why is it these two that stood out among the priorities you want to achieve?
Speed, because 2 years ago when I made the decision, I had a deep belief that the new Vault platform would have AI built into it by the time that we arrived. We wanted to go quickly because we wanted to get onto the new world. We wanted to be on the new platform. We wanted to be able to access new features as soon as we could. So that was the reason for speed. And the reason for a lack of disruption was really simple. You know, we've got incredibly stretching and ambitious sales targets. And we actually had a CRM platform in our previous Viva version that was fit for purpose and working. No one was going to thank me for disrupting a sales force with challenging sales targets. So the technologist in me wanted to get us to the next generation, wanted to make sure we had no tech debt, and wanted to enable us with AI as soon as possible. And then the business hat that I was wearing said there must be no disruption.
GSK is publicly recognized to be extremely ambitious in the AI space. How do you translate that high ambition into tangible results and operations at GSK?
I think it's deceptively simple to describe what we've done. It doesn't mean it's easy, but we really looked at where are the key value generating processes within the company. There's no secret. It's going to be the way we do our research, the way we are selecting and running trials, the way that we're planning and manufacturing, the way that we're engaging customers. So we looked at these key value-adding processes. We then looked at the processes within them that we felt generative AI and AI more generally had the opportunity to give us a step change in improvement. So we looked at where we thought these key sort of 15, 20 value drivers were. We validated them with the owners of those processes, sought senior endorsement, and then really started with a sort of quick cycle of experiment, and where they succeeded, we invested. I don't think there was honestly a huge amount of complexity there. It really was about truly understanding where the company generates value, which of the processes there we thought we could optimize, and then how we really lined up our finest technical talent and the deep process experts to see how we could try and transform the performance of the company in those few areas which would deliver disproportionate benefit.
So it sounds almost like was 3 steps involved. It was looking at the biggest value pools, validating them, and then investing into those. Where are you now on that journey, and what's the next step after that? Because now that you've launched into these and invested into these areas, how do you ensure that that investment pays off?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're very pleased with the progress we've made so far. We obviously want more progress. We have stretching ambitions for year-on-year growth in the value we're delivering from AI. And one of the ways we're going to be able to get more value from our AI investments is actually to expand out to some of the broader core business processes we've got, whether that's in tech, whether it's in finance or procurement or HR, particularly with agentic, actually, and looking at how that can help us run faster, more efficient processes with a better quality user experience.
One of the side effects of AI is that the compliance angle becomes maybe more challenging than it was before, where before there were clear rules and there was a human who had to interpret and enforce those rules. Now we're dealing with agentic systems who take on tasks that humans were doing before, at least to a certain degree. Now, one of the hats you're wearing is also in the compliance area, in the technology compliance area. How does your system and the architecture of the system actually enforce the necessary compliance around agentic AI?
I think there's probably a couple of ways I'd answer that. The first one is, I think for important processes and certainly regulated processes, we very much are keeping a human in the loop. There's a number of processes where we are providing significant amounts of AI assistance. Anything that's regulated, whether that's from a financial point of view or a safety point of view, we make sure that the human remains in the loop. So I think that's the first thing to be saying at this stage. The other thing was, it became clear to us in 23 that AI was slightly different and we would need to think about it differently. We couldn't just apply our previous quality, risk and compliance frameworks to it. But we also knew that we didn't yet know everything about AI. So the way that we started was in 2023, we looked at what would an MVP be for a policy around making sure that we had responsible AI. And we set up a board of senior stakeholders to review the projects which seemed to be of medium and high risk. We sort of took a structured approach in terms of laying down the clear rules. And then we had an approach where we had a sort of sounding board where people could apply judgment. And that judgment could be that this was lower risk than people thought, or it could obviously be the other way. It could actually be saying, no, we think this is disproportionately risky. So we put that in place in 2023, and it's worked well so far. We've iterated, we're continually learning as we go.
Medical affairs, one of your hats and your main hat, I may say. Medical affairs is shifting towards measuring their strategic impact as part of the customer-facing functions, kind of part of the function interplay of a pharma company. How does GSK's data architecture, system architecture support that approach of strategic impact of medical affairs?
It's an area we've put a lot of thought into. We haven't yet cracked it. So I don't think anyone's really cracked it for medical affairs yet. But I think there's a few things we've seen that are working, and there's a few lessons that we've learned. So I think the gold standard we would love to see is reduction in unmet patient need. That's the absolute gold standard. If we can see how the medical function working with HCPs has reduced the unmet need in a particular disease area that they've been working on, That's the absolute gold standard. There are some countries that we can do that. There are some data sets that allow it. It's not always easy, and it's certainly not something that's easy to do across a dozen therapy areas.
I imagine.
And 50 countries. So that's the gold standard. Where we can, we will do that. I think back to your piece on data architecture, one of the areas we put a huge amount of work on in my medical digital and tech team is really trying to look at how we can create a single data fabric that joins up all the way from understanding where the evidence gaps are, through to the evidence that we believe we need to generate, through to the SciComms we're creating, the way that we're engaging customers, whether that's through MSLs, whether it's them calling medical information, and then how we can close the loop on that. And what we're starting to do is get a lot more disciplined about how we've got a single red thread of data all the way back from where is it that we've got an evidence gap we need to close, all the way through that process. I think historically as an industry, we've been quite good at measuring within the medical silos. We're very good at measuring what's gone on in medcoms or in promomats. We're very good at measuring what's gone on in CRM. But I think in terms of going right back and saying, here is the evidence need, here are the studies we're going to run, here is the content we've created, here's how that content's been localized, here's how it's been used. I think we've been weaker at that, and we're putting a huge amount of effort into the data quality and the data architecture needed to do that. The technology is already here. It's mostly the vision and the discipline to implement it across that full scope of 8 processes. End to end is our focus.
Does that extend also into the clinical space? We were talking about medical commercial, because there's another silo, right, that in many companies is very, very strong. So the clinical space kind of plays a role there as well.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, that absolutely is extending right back into clinical, because, I mean, putting it at its simplest, all the trials that the medical says that we need to run to generate this evidence, generate this new data, that's actually executed by our clinical function, who, as it happens, are running Viva CTMS.
Okay. Well, there's another kind of unifying factor then on the platform.
Absolutely.
But the data fabric you're talking about needs to come together to actually allow that end-to-end view across the different silos. Okay. One other really important factor that a lot of the companies out there are looking to nowadays is the talent question. By putting new tools into the hands of humans or into the processes and workflows, such as agentic AI, the question becomes, what skills and capabilities does the talent that we hire now into our companies need to have in terms of AI literacy, in terms of data literacy? What are your thoughts around the talent that is required to actually run these type of future-looking systems?
I think when we're hiring, it becomes a absolutely key must-have criteria that we've got people who are data-centric and data-first. I think if people are thinking, letting the data drive them, I think AI then becomes an enabler. It's the oil in the machine that helps the right mindset function better. So I think in all hiring, that is certainly absolutely key for how I'm approaching all hiring decisions. But of course, most of our staff are not people that we're going out and hiring now. One thing we've seen in our medical affairs function is we've had real disproportionate value from putting a huge amount of energy into creating very, very specific training for medical affairs. We've got an internal large language model that we use, which spans many of our corporate processes internally. We created dedicated training for med affairs on that tool. And we've seen the result of that was that we're now actually getting twice the usage of the next highest function. So the good news is what we've seen is when we put disproportionate effort into explaining exactly how this tool will help the medical staff in their day job, we are seeing huge returns. I think the thing that my team are reflecting on, we may need to put that disproportionate amount of focus on training. And actually, that's a bit of a change for us. This isn't the usual a quick e-learning course, quick Q&A, a webinar. It's looking like we may need to put a lot more attention on this very role-specific training, which is, it's great, we've seen it works, but we absolutely are having to think quite hard about what does that mean about our role, about the focus on benefits realization, the focus on capability building, where does the role of digital and tech stop, and the role of our medical excellence group start, all sorts of questions like that. But what we are seeing is putting it live and issuing basic training isn't enough. It needs some real sweat and investment.
With agentic AI in particular, the workflows are potentially changing and improving significantly. And that may be a new experience also for the users.
I think what we're going to find with agentic is, my personal feeling is, we're going to find it's really good at doing some of the work. And so bits of our jobs will get leaner and leaner and leaner. We're also going to find it's going to be really disappointing at some other bits of the work. And so we're going to find that our job may have a lot less of task A and a lot more of task B. And that's actually going to be quite a shift for people over time, I think.
Kieron, there is one last question. We ask that actually to all of our podcast guests. We call it the stop-start challenge. So if there is one thing that you could press the stop button on that the industry should stop doing, and one thing that the industry should start doing, what would those two be?
I'm going to have two sides of the same coin. I think the stop would be, as an industry, we still seem to, I think when we're deciding what we're going to do next year, we seem to be disproportionately influenced by what we did this year and what we did last year. And some people add 10% to it or take 10% off the cost. Other people will be bold and add 20% to it or take 20% off. But it's all looking in the rearview mirror. I think what we need to do, what we need to start, is actually getting a lot smarter about working out what is the data that we need that will actually tell us what it is we actually need to do next year without reference to the past. What is the data telling us the right thing for us to do in role X or process Y next year? And I think that's where the opportunity lies.
Kieron, thank you very much for being the guest on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.